And it took me about 3 years to get the rights to the story to let Max allow me to make a short film of it.
Well, we just enjoyed a great independent movie called The Last Lullaby. We have a special guest here. We're joined by director Jeffrey Goodman. So thanks for spending some time with us on Stark Silver Creek.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the film. We'll get to that in a moment. We'll talk about sales, marketing, distribution, and social media because we're really interested to talk about that as well. But I think, first of all, we have to address the almost the elephant in the room, which is, you know, this cliche of you know, like everyone else, becoming a filmmaker out of Shreveport, Louisiana. How does that happen?
Yeah, I really got into film relatively late. I went to college in St. Louis, and I spent my junior year abroad in France, and it was during that year that I first really got. I call it, like, I think to be a filmmaker, it's almost an addiction or obsession. It's bigger than you, and it's not always a nice thing because you can't always wriggle free from it, because if you could, you probably wouldn't do it. And it was during that year that, for the first time, I was exposed to kind of a different way of thinking about film. I mean, growing up in Shreveport, it's a fairly provincial place, and I only, growing up, was exposed to two types of films, I felt. Either like big Hollywood blockbusters, and most of those films struck me as being very technical, very special effects driven, and I didn't really see that I could make those because I'm not that person. And then the only alternative I was exposed to growing up was what I would call the merchant ivory pictures, movies like Remains of the Day or Howard's Inn, these Victorian costume dramas that, you know, they were beautiful, and my mom was like, aren't those so artistic? But, you know, they didn't really speak to me at that young age. And so it took being in France, and I was there at a very powerful time. I think France in general has as strong of a film culture as any place I've ever been. The French consider themselves the inventors of cinema. Film started in 1895, and the Lumiere brothers, who were two French brothers, are often credited with inventing film. And I think because of that, the French really take a lot of pride in this thing that they consider their baby. So I happened to be there 1994, 1995, and that year I was just exposed to personal, artistic, kind of small-scale cinema, stuff that I'd never seen before. And it was also, 1995 was the 100th anniversary of film, so there was this incredible energy. There's always a lot of energy in France around film, but that year in particular, there was an incredible amount of energy. So there was that. Also, 1994 was the year that Pulp Fiction won the best film at the Cannes Film Festival, and that was kind of a revolution in film because Quentin Tarantino was one of the first guys to kind of make it without going to film school. And here I was in the midst of catching this bug and this obsession, and I was struggling with, well, you know, do I have to be schooled to do this? And all of a sudden this guy emerges, and he's as much of a rock star on the film scene as the film world had seen in the last 20 years. And so there was just this confluence of all this incredible energy all coming into my life at the same time, and it just felt like the right thing.
So let's talk about this project a little bit, how it came to you, how you got involved, because it seems to me the story you told to the audience after the Q&A of the last screening we saw here in San Jose, you'd mentioned I think a 10-year effort, and you came back a couple of times on this project. So tell us a little bit about that.
I went back to France for a year, 1996, 1997, then I went back to Louisiana, got my head together, and then decided to move out to Los Angeles in 1998, knowing full well I wanted to be a director, but also I was very clear. This was right around the time that the whole concept of being a writer and director was really becoming quite popular, because I mean, a lot of if you look at the first 70, 80 years of film, it's very rare for those classics to be written and directed by the same person. So it's only in recent years, the last 20, 30 years, that this whole writer-director concept has become so popular. And yet, I've always struggled with words and with writing, and I've never felt very comfortable with a pen in my hand. And so, you know, when I moved out to Los Angeles, I said, initially, I'm not going to go to film school, and I'm not a good writer. And so to make it as a director, I'm either going to have to, A, hook up with people who write, who don't want to direct, or B, find material for someone to adapt for me to direct. And so at the time, since I wasn't going to film school, I had kind of set out the following path for myself. I said I was going to make short films, and hopefully each time out, be a little more ambitious, and hopefully each time out improve upon the previous film and keep doing that. I didn't know how many I was going to make. I didn't know if I was going to make 2 or 10, and I was hopefully would reach a certain point just confidence-wise where I felt ready to take on a full-length film, because I knew ultimately I didn't want to direct commercials, I didn't want to direct music videos, I didn't even want to direct for TV, and I certainly didn't want to spend a career as a short film filmmaker. I wanted to make full-length films. That was my real passion.
By the way, how many of those shorts did you have to make before you?
I made 6 over the course of, I guess, 7 years. And, you know, like I said, it was just kind of a gut thing, like, okay, I'm not ready yet, I'm not ready yet, I got to make another one, I got to make another one. And so because the path I set out for myself was I was going to make short films, I thought some of the best source material for those were short stories, and so I was reading any short story I could get my hands on, and that's when I came across the short story that's the basis of Last Lullaby, which is entitled A Matter of Principle, and it appeared in a compilation called A Mammoth Book of Pulp Fiction. It was like 40 short stories by famous people like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and James M. Cain, David Goodis, and then some of the more contemporary crime fiction writers as well, like Max Allan Collins. And it took me about 3 years to get the rights to the story to let Max allow me to make a short film of it. I made a short film of it in 2002, took it around the country to film festivals in 2003, and by that point, that was my 6th short film. That was 19 minutes long. It was very involved, had some action sequences. It was just complex, and I felt like I did it justice. And Max, the writer, was really happy with the way it turned out and said, well, what do you want to do now? And I said, you know, honestly, I feel ready to take that next step. And he said, well, what do you think about expanding what we've done into a full-length story? And I said, well, what do you have in mind? And so he came up with an idea to expand it. We batted around for a while, and finally he went off and he wrote the script. And that became The Last Lullaby.
So Last Lullaby is really an extended version, perhaps, of A Matter of Principle?
Exactly. Yeah, A Matter of Principle. For anyone who sees The Last Lullaby, A Matter of Principle, the short story, the basis for the whole film is only now the first 7 minutes of the movie. A Matter of Principle ends with him rescuing the girl and re-ransoming her to her father. And everything from that point forward was newly created for The Last Lullaby.
And just a quick question, Max Allan Collins, how does that happen? You're reading the book, these short stories, and you're like, this is a good one, I think I could do something with this. How do you just call the guy and introduce yourself? Did you know him before? Did you have contacts?
It's weird. I mean, I guess everyone's courageous in different ways. Like, you know, I won't walk back to my car. I mean, I would, but I'd be scared walking back to my car in any city at 3 a.m. at night, and other people would have no problem doing that. But it's funny, when I was in college, I remember my freshman year in college, I was taking a political science course, and we had to write a paper on someone, and our professor gave us a list of like 100 topics to choose, and no one could choose the same topic. So I ended up writing a paper on this guy, John Anderson, who ran for presidential office in 1980 as a third-party candidate. And, you know, I found out he was still alive, and I was like, well, I'm going to track this guy down and just, you know, see if I can talk to him. That would certainly help my efforts in my paper. And so they had a book, I don't know what it's called, but they had a book like in the library at my university called Directory of Famous People or something like that, and you can like look people up, and you
that
can.
Was the Google of the time.
It was, yeah. This is pre-internet. This is 1992, and so you know they had this guy's home address, and so I called information, gave him the address. They gave me a phone number. I called the phone number. 2 rings. You know, this guy picks up. I'm like, can I speak to John Anderson? This is he. I'm looking for John Anderson who ran for president. 1980, this is he. And so I ended up conducting, you know, an hour-long interview with him, and I guess there's just something in me that, you know, that kind of stuff doesn't scare me per se. And so when I first read the short story, I just thought it made a really good film, and I picked up the phone. I called I had the address of the publisher, so I called directory assistants, gave him the address for the publisher. I ended up getting the publisher on the line, and I said, I'm a filmmaker, I'm in Los Angeles, I'm interested in turning A Matter of Principle into a film. How do I go about acquiring the rights to do that? And he said, I think Max Allan Collins has those rights, the writer. I'll put you in touch with Max. So he put me in touch with Max and called Max. I said the same thing. It's Jeffrey Goodman. I'm a filmmaker in Los Angeles. I'm interested in turning your story into a film.